Good evening, this is Free Media, Free Minds with me, your host Chelsea Noah Ogilvy on Cape Town TV. And tonight we will have a look at the excessive load shedding in Zimbabwe and what that means for lack of access to information. So when asked what will be affected by the power outages, Eskom, who's the supplier for electricity in South Africa and Zimbabwe, replied with a gift list of electronic supplies, but never really considered what a lack of the access to the internet means for access to information. So this episode came about in the process of producing the previous 11 episodes, where we saw most of our Zimbabwean guests unable to receive email invitations to join the show, never mind Skyping into actual episodes. So for now, let's head over to Zimbabwe to hear from our co-producer Nomagugu Nyati, who has compared the situation in Zimbabwe to prison. Let's hear from her.
Hi Chelsea, thank you so much for inviting me to the show. My name is Nomagugu. I am a co-producer for Free Media, Free Minds, and I am also a citizen of Zimbabwe, currently living in Zimbabwe. I believe we designed this show after noticing that access to information and media freedom, those rights, do not actually thrive in an environment where there is severe power cuts. Zimbabwe is in a phase of severe power cuts. The Electrification Authority, called ZESA, which is the equivalent of Eskom in South Africa, has been going through challenges for the past, I would say since 2007, at least that's when they officially admitted that they have challenges. There has been issues of corruption within the authority, and which I think are partly to blame for what's going on now. Although there are other more official reasons, which is the drying up of the Kariba Dam, and also the Wange colliery, where we get our coal, which generates power for the whole country, and the depletion of that coal, and just the lack of infrastructure, and just no revenue, and just the brokenness of the country, if I may to put it as simple as that, to purchase equipment and to purchase enough coal to power up the whole country. Now, so I strongly believe that when we think of electricity and its impact on people in Zimbabwe currently, whenever that's discussed, it's in the realm of power cuts are affecting business, and power cuts mean that we don't manufacture. There's already a lack of industry in Zimbabwe already, so the little business that was there is now being affected by power cuts, right? But there's little thought as well on how the lack of power cuts affect democracy. I realized that there was something there. The moment I cannot watch the news at 8 p.m. on the national broadcaster, I cannot watch the news because at that time there's load shedding. Basically, load shedding is 16 hours every day of no electricity in most urban areas. At least I live in Bulawayo and we're experiencing 16 hours. I've heard of other places where they have 18 hours of no lights. And there are no lights between 6 a.m. in the morning and sometimes it's 5 a.m. in the morning up until 10 p.m. So for as long as people are awake, there's no electricity. So for as long as people are awake, there's no access to TV. There's no access to radio. I suppose some people are accessing it over their phones, but if your phone hasn't been charged overnight, then it's also kind of like a disaster for you in terms of access to information. Access to information is a right which is protected both in domestic law in Zimbabwe, and I believe also in South Africa and in many other countries. It's also in the Convention for Civil and Political Rights. It's called Article 19. That is the freedom of expression provision, which provides for media freedom, and that includes the right to access information. Right to access to information means the ability to seek and get information from public authorities. In a sense, it is the right to It's a right that guarantees accountability. It's a right that says, tell us what's happening, exactly what's happening. Now, I have gone to the ZESA website and I've seen that they do put up information on there about load shedding, and they put the schedules up. And according to them, we're in stage 2 of load shedding. The information that's not there currently is when they are going to fix it. When is this going to be fixed? There's no such information. All we get is the fact that the country is going through a really tough time. And so there's no access to information if they cannot tell us what the plan is. So that's in a nutshell what is going on in Zimbabwe. At the international level, or more closer to home, at the African Union level, there has not been, in my view, there has not been enough push to consider the right to energy as a fundamental right, because electricity is a catalyst to innovation. It improves the standard of life for many people. And in terms of health, you can imagine how a hospital would operate without electricity. In terms of education, schools cannot operate without electricity. But what's happening now, and what has been the norm in the past 5 months, and perhaps if this problem started in 2007 but at a smaller scale, the right to education has slowly been affected, but really been affected. It means that children have to study in the dark. It means that those who are at university and who rely on their laptops a lot and on the internet cannot access it as effectively as they would have when there's electricity. So energy is proving to be a real basic right, and it needs to be taken a notch up in terms of just seeing it as basic. And governments need to start putting up more plans, more business solutions to how energy can be improved, access to energy can be improved. It's a really great opportunity now that there's focus on environmental rights. Solar energy is in abundance in Africa. As I speak now, in Zim, we've had a heat wave in the past. Last week, there's lots and lots of sun. Why should we not have light? Why should we not have electricity? Small businesses are starting to sell solar gadgets, and bit by bit, solar is becoming the way of life. But it's just people making a plan on their own. But in terms of at the government level, there's also talk about having a solar solution. But in the meantime, we are severely affected, as I said, in education. And in terms of democracy, we are seriously affected. Chelsea, you remember that we had planned to invite certain activists to participate in this show, and very instrumental and very important people in the democracy of Zimbabwe. Activists that have been arrested, that are constantly under the eye, that are constantly targeted, and would have enriched our knowledge and our information on this show. But they could not participate because they could not have access to Skype during the day as they would have wanted to. And that just frustrated their efforts, and they could not share their perspectives with the rest of the viewers at Cape Town TV, just because of not having power. And that's just that's unfortunate for the civil society sector. So yeah, it is an opportunity. And I'm saying it's an opportunity to consider renewable energy, and it's an opportunity also for activists and public interest organizations to explore this in court, to put it in front of the courts, the constitutional court, to test it out, and to say, is it constitutional? Not even to say is it constitutional, but to have constitutional court declare that the right to electricity or the right to energy is essential part of the right to access information, which means it's a basic human right which contributes to democracy. Something as basic as not having a charged phone means that you cannot mobilize if you want to mobilize anything. I cannot, if I wanted to do an event in my community and I wanted to start my WhatsApp group, it means that I must only chat at night when there are lights, and that's very impractical. That doesn't work at all. Or else it means I have to find other solutions which are it's going backward. There's new media now, and new media is supposed to make the life of an activist, the life of citizens, much easier and much more effective when they organize.
Now that we've heard from Numagugu Inyati giving us some context into how things are in real life in Zimbabwe at the moment, we are going to now hear from Rufaro Kadirire, who is a journalist joining us out of Zimbabwe. Now, since we are unable to conduct Skype interviews with most of our guests for this episode, they have compromised to send us voice notes. So let's have a listen.
The problem with electricity and these power blackouts in Zimbabwe and how they affect our work as journalists is that our work is 24 hours, you know? There's no rest. Literally, it's a thankless job. But we love it because it's a labor of love. We do it because we love it. It's sort of like our calling. It's like being a doctor, but being a doctor of words. So now, when there is no power, I have to, try and make a plan. But then the plan now is you need to buy data. Now, data is now very expensive back home. So you find that most of the times people tend to compress a lot of their work during the time when they're at their formal employment. So when you're at work, you do other side jobs, other side journalism jobs, and even work maybe 2, 3, or 4 days ahead, just so that when there's a power blackout, you're safe. But then that safety still, it's not guaranteed because you may lose some of the material that you saved up. So we're in a very precarious position. The power blackouts also affect our internet, not availability, but the quality. The videos on live feeds may be very poor. You can see it, but you have to make out what someone is trying to say or what someone is trying to do. You can't exactly see their facial expression. And for visuals, that's not really good because that's what people want to do. They want to connect visually, they want to connect emotionally with the journalist, with whoever's being interviewed. So for us journalists, it's a really big challenge, these power blackouts. And for some time, you find during the day it's a bit better, but then when it's after 5, people want to rest. That's when we also want to work because it's after hours, but you can't do that because there's no power. It comes back at 10 o'clock. So you find yourself doing a graveyard shift while you're at home because that's when the power's back. So that's the situation we have here. But overall, we are just trying to make the best of what's there. If there's power at work, you do everything while you're at work and send it out in the hope that it doesn't get lost along the way.
We are chatting to Rufaro Kadirire, a journalist joining us out of Zimbabwe, on load shedding in Zimbabwe and what that means for lack of access to information. So right about now, we are going to take an ad break to pay the bills, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation. Welcome back from the ad break. You are still watching Free Media, Free Minds with me, your host, Chelsea Noah Ogilvy. And tonight we are discussing excessive load shedding in Zimbabwe and what that means for lack of access to information.
On the first question relating to what the right of access to information entails and how not having it affects other human rights, the right of access to information has been around and recognized in international instruments for a very long time. specifically in relation to its recognition in Africa. I believe South Africa was the first country to recognize the right of access to information in its constitution in 1996. And since then, there's been an explosion across the continent with several countries during their constitutional reform processes have begun to recognize the right of access to information. That has also resulted in the passage of a number of access to information laws across the continent. At the moment, we have well over 20 countries having a right of access to information law in their statutory framework. And one of the reasons why there's been this explosion of recognition of access to information in the continent has been driven by the adoption by the African Union in 2015 of a model law on the right of access to information. This was a process facilitated by the former Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa, Pansitla Kula, during her tenure at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. When the model law was adopted in 2015, the African Commission embarked on an advocacy process visiting quite a number of countries, soliciting the support of different African governments to use the model law to adopt access to information laws in their respective countries. And this advocacy process was largely successful. And one of the reasons why it was also successful was the fact that academics, scholars, and activists tried to make the case that governments should stop seeing access to information as a law that largely favored journalists, but one that was incredibly relevant for the realization of other rights. So, the case that is often made in relation to the need to have an access to information law has been, if you want to help citizens to access other tangible rights such as socioeconomic rights relating to right to housing, right to food, right to water. Quite often, citizens need access to information to be able to exercise that right. They need access to information to know the specifics and contents of their entitlements under the law to be able to lay claim to access other human rights. So, take the example of South Africa, where we have a very robust socioeconomic framework for people to be able to make their claim at a local government level on accessing these tangible rights such as housing, such as water. People need to know the contents, for instance, of the budget of a municipality. And it is the right of access to information that helps citizens to get information, to get relevant records that will help them know the content of a municipality's budget, the content of a municipality's plan, so that citizens can lay the relevant claim to be able to access this particular right that they are yearning for. So overall, the right of access to information has been placed on the continent as one that is incredibly vital to unlock access to other socioeconomic rights, and that is why we're increasingly seeing the embrace of these rights on the African continent, which is a very positive thing for the advancement of constitutional democracy.
So right about now, we are going to have a look at our community notice board for this episode. Check it out. was our community notice board for this week. So thank you to my guests for joining us in this conversation. Rufaro Kararire for joining us out of Zimbabwe. If you'd like to keep the conversation going, you can join us at freemedia.freeminds on Instagram and Free Media Free Minds on Facebook. And from me, Chelsea Noah Ogilvie, good night, keep it real, and if it's unreal, keep it anyway.